Have you ever wondered who each attachment style is most likely to end up with in the long run? In other words, who they're most likely to commit to marry? Well, in today's video, we are going to break that down for you. And some of these might really surprise you. But I'm going to start with the least surprising and then move towards the most surprising data and neuroscience research that we have. And we'll talk a little bit about the neuroscience of this at a deeper level as well. If you're new to this channel, hello and welcome. My name is Gibson. I'm the founder of Gibson Integrated Attachment Theory, a proven method to leverage neuroplasticity to actually rewire your attachment style. And after about 14 years of working both in private practice and in our online group programs at the Personal Development School, I'm here on this channel to share with you the most powerful insights about healing and transformation when it comes to your childhood and past experiences and healing from past relationships so that you can live your best life. Let's break this down here. Here's the first not so surprising information. Securely attached people are most likely to end up in the long run with, you guessed it, other securely attached people. I actually want to tell you what's happening here at a deeper level so you understand this. So securely attached individuals, every single person, we all have a subconscious set point, okay? So we all have a way that we expect love to look according to our previous conditioning from past relationships and experiences. So because securely attached people grow up in a securely attached household and they generally have secure and healthy relationship experiences, they end up essentially assuming that we should be able to trust each other, we should be able to rely on each other, it's safe to be vulnerable, it's safe to express my emotions to other people, and I have no problem with people doing that to me. I've learned to communicate, and communication is healthy and something that we can do in this relationship, and essentially a bar that I've already set. It's a standard for securely attached people to communicate healthily with other securely attached people. And because they grow up like this, if somebody shows up in relationship dynamics where they are being too volatile or too hot and cold, too clingy, too distant, securely attached people, that does not match with their subconscious set of expectations. Okay, so we are all conditioned about relationships, and that conditioning exists essentially in your subconscious mind. Then we tend to repeat these different patterns out in the world because they're our set point. And one thing you really want to understand here is that your subconscious mind is responsible for roughly 95% of all of your beliefs, thoughts, emotions, actions. It is your habituated self. Your conscious mind is your logical, analytical self, okay? So here's where you have this. Securely attached people, they're more likely to end up with securely attached people because that's what feels safe. That's what feels familiar to them. Now, let's look at some of the other relationship dynamics here. Anxiously attached individuals and dismissive avoidants are often quite attracted to each other. It's not the only potential attachment style pairing, but if you ever thought that anxious and anxious end up together or dismissive and dismissive end up together, this is highly unlikely. The only exceptions you tend to see to this rule of anxious ending up with other anxious people or dismissives ending up with other dismissives is that one of those parties or both parties are doing the work to become secure. But otherwise, you'll generally see two dismissive avoidants in a relationship together never picks up steam. Nobody wants to be vulnerable or make the first move. And so there can be attraction and infatuation, but it never really gets legs. Anxiously attached individuals, two anxious people, you can think of almost it being like the same end of a magnet. It tends to repel each other. Now, here's why, okay? Our subconscious mind, and I really want you to understand this, this is a huge part of the neuroscience of all of this. Our subconscious mind is wired to maintain its comfort zone. It's wired to go with what's familiar. It equates familiarity to safety and thus survival. And we've been talking about this on the channel for years and years, but anxiously attached individuals, because they're so in this space of people pleasing, they end up essentially being in an avoidant relationship to self. So they're so focused on everybody else, they dismiss and avoid themselves. Guess what feels the most familiar and safe to them? People who dismiss and avoid them too. Hence, they tend to go for emotionally unavailable people, right? A huge part of the reason for this. Let's flip it around. Dismissive avoidants are essentially in an anxious relationship to themselves. They are constantly moderating and trying to control their emotional bandwidth. They're like, do I have enough energy? Do I have enough space? Do I have enough time with myself? Do I have enough time alone? So they are literally anxiously attached to themselves at a subconscious level, as we've been saying on here for years. And you'll see that as a result of that, that anxious attachment dynamic where somebody is also treating them the way that they treat themselves feels very comfortable and thus familiar. And so we'll often see these pairs show up together. Fearful avoidance and fearful avoidance often end up in relationships together. Two fearful avoidance often bond. But fearful avoidance, because they have both this anxious and dismissive avoidance side, they can be with anxious people, they can be with dismissive avoidant people, and they tend to repel each other. This is not the data about long-term, okay? This is just some like who ends up dating a lot of the time in general. I wanna let you know we have for free as a gift our Discover, Embrace, and Fulfill Your Relationship Needs course. It's all about learning your relationship needs to self and your own personal relationship needs. It's one of these 6 major pillars to actually healing and rewiring your attachment style. And it helps you learn people's needs in your life, even if they're not taking the course with you. It helps you understand the patterns and themes that people show that then translates into what needs they generally have, both in relationships, in friendships, family relationships. It really dives deep into understanding the language of needs, because it's actually more important to understand people's needs and how we exchange them when it comes to essentially the languages of love than your typical love languages that you'll see. Needs hit way deeper. So if you want to learn all about that, you get to actually keep that course for free for life. It's a gift that comes along with your 7-day free trial if you want to check out the Personal Development School for free for 7 days. I'll put that below. We just have this for a limited time, so I hope you check it out. I'm going to give you 2 outputs now. People who do the work in the relationships, we're going to leave at the end because that's the most important piece. And then we're going to talk first about people who aren't doing the work. So assuming that somebody does not really know about their attachment style and how it works, and somebody's on autopilot, who are they most likely to stay with long-term, not just feel attracted to initially, okay? So there was a study done by somebody named David Sander in 2008, and it really studied the brains of dismissive avoidant and anxious attachment styles. And then they studied how each attachment style responds to this game and the interactions when they saw people either smiling, showing this sort of supportive response, or angry, showing these sort of critical or off-putting faces, and linked to you won the game, good job, or you lost kind of feedback. Okay, so they're basically studying people's responses to feedback during this game. And it was found that the more attachment avoidance that was there was more reduced activation in the ventral striatum and ventral tegmental areas of the brain. And this basically equates to they had blunted reward to social support. In other words, dismissive avoidance, they are not feeling the same. They essentially under-respond at a brain level to emotional support. Okay, now this is going to play into who they end up with in the long game, okay? The more anxious somebody was, the stronger left amygdala activation they had to angry or rejecting feedback, okay? So you can think of this as being they were more hypersensitive to social punishment. And so anxious partners, you can think of whose brains tend to be more threat sensitive, they often kept pursuing the other person, even when the avoidant was shutting down. And of course, you see this lead to what we know as the classic anxious avoidant trap, where the dismissive avoidant sort of shutting down. The anxious attachment styles tend to pursue because they feel this threat by not receiving the social support that they're looking for. So on a brain level, dismissive avoidants are wired to feel less reward from emotional closeness, which makes them more likely to feel comfortable and safe with partners who are not overly demanding of emotional engagement. In other words, dismissive avoidants end up most likely staying in longer term relationships with individuals. Remember, this is if they're not doing the work, individuals who are more independent. In other words, dismissive avoidants are more likely to end up in longer term relationships with fearful avoidant attachment styles. They may feel some of that initial pull and excitement around anxiously attached partners, but they are quick to end up leaving or fleeing those relationships the moment they feel overstimulated by the degree of connection that an anxious attachment style is trying to pull from them. I'm going to tell you what to do about that in a little bit too. This is not a call for you, if you are anxiously attached listening to this, to then start suppressing your emotional needs. In fact, what you'll actually see as we go into the next bucket here in just a moment is that us speaking our needs, showing up, communicating openly, this actually allows us to have the most momentum and moving of the needle towards secure attachment with both parties in a relationship. So we'll come back to that in a moment. So our more avoidant partners, because they rely on cognitive control and deactivation, they often feel less stressed with people who don't demand high emotional effusion, which are other fearful avoidants, because they still are wired to be attracted to somebody who still has that ability to show up and engage them and drive the relationship forward, where other dismissive avoidants with them won't, but somebody who also is still quite independent. Okay, so that's our summary of dismissive avoidance. Now, I think it's really important to just note here as well that dismissive avoidance, if they start doing the work, things can change. Okay, so things will change when we start doing the work of who we're really attracted to and who we stay in long-term relationships with. But the last thing about dismissive avoidance too is that they also are likely to end up alone. There's a very large portion of dismissive avoidants who literally just never feel comfortable letting down their walls, engaging in people. And so they often go through these sort of short-lived relationships, a very common output or theme for strong dismissive avoidants who never do the work. And so they go through these consistent relationships, usually lasting a year to 2 years, sometimes even shorter, sort of around that initial 4 to 6 month mark. But generally most dismissive avoidants, as they get later into their life, break up in the power struggle stage of relationship, usually around a year to 2 years. And during this period of time where you're seeing this, what we'll generally see take shape is that as this is happening, over time, those relationships, they become less and less engaged in and less fulfilled by, because if they're not doing the work, their defenses really just increase over time. And that blunted reward from emotional connection in relationships continues to blunt. And so what you'll see is that dismissive avoidants end up in their later years, in their 50s and their 60s, eventually just spending long periods of time alone and sometimes spending the rest of their lives alone. And that's a very common output. Now, I'm going to do more in-depth videos for the other attachment styles and who they tend to end up with, but at a very high level, I will say this. Fearful avoidants often end up with any insecure attachment style, but are highly unlikely to end up with secure attachment styles. This is because fearful avoidants have both this anxious and dismissive side to them. And what is interesting is that they can end up with other fearful avoidants too, but those relationships will often become so deep and intense, but then burn out. Like they will become so chaotic that it's very difficult for those fearful avoidant relationships to sustain themselves. There's too much of being on the emotional roller coaster. Remember, this does change if people are willing to do the work. Okay, so don't worry too much. If you're in one of those now, you can still do the work to start becoming more secure. And as one partner or both partners become dominantly secure in a relationship, things really start to shift and change, but very unlikely to last in the long run. Fearful avoidants with anxious attachment styles follow a similar output, a lot of intensity, a lot of excitement, a lot of connection, a lot of depth, and then a burnout tends to happen because there's just too much codependency and enmeshment in those relationship dynamics. And on the flip side, fearful avoidants with dismissive avoidance, they tend to actually have longer lasting relationships if they do get off the ground. But again, they will still follow these same tracks because two insecure attachment style partners are just simply less likely to stay in long-term relationships. Can happen, absolutely. But generally, they're not forever lasting relationships or relationships that ever really make it out of the power struggle stage. So you may see this safety in the fact that the fearful avoidant is dating somebody who's not as enmeshed with them, and that can be helpful. But then fearful avoidants often act out in those relationships because they often feel like they're lacking emotional depth. Again, unless somebody is willing to do the work. Anxious attachment styles are often most attracted to dismissive avoidance in the short run. In the long run, often those relationships fizzle out because the anxious attachment styles trying to invest themselves so much with somebody who's constantly pulling away. And anxious attachment styles with fearful avoidance are likely to last longer than the anxious and dismissive avoidant dynamic because anxious and fearful avoidance in relationships together at least share that meaningful connection of that depth, that intensity, and that willingness and generosity to really deeply try to care for each other. But again, that enmeshment usually leads to resentment and poor boundaries, which makes for a very difficult relationship cycle. The last piece here that's really important is that if you are trying to understand who's most likely to end up with each other once people start doing the work, here's the great news. When each attachment style starts doing the work to become secure and starts learning to emotionally regulate themselves, have better boundaries, regulate their nervous systems, and get into a space where they rewire their core wounds and learn their needs, when we go through these major pillars of healing our attachment style, if you are paired with any other attachment style, you can still heal and you can still make your relationship work. In fact, when I would have clients come into my client practice, and telling you this with like full honesty, I didn't care who came in to see me, to work with me. I didn't care how much trauma they had. I didn't care what attachment style pairing they had. The number one thing I looked for, and this is the number one determiner that you will see over and over again without exception, is are both people willing to do the work? And if both people are willing to do the work, you can have any attachment style pairing and it can work. But if one person is unwilling, unbudging, unmoving, not willing, then I always say people in a relationship are each 100% responsible for their 50%. And so that's going to make for a lack of true fulfillment in a relationship. So that should be the number one thing you look out for. It's so fun and interesting to learn about attachment style pairings, and people don't know and what it's going to look like. But if both people are literally willing to do the rewiring, it has to be rewiring work to be meaningful. If both people are willing to do the rewiring of their attachment styles, that is where the needle truly moves. And that is where any pairing can really work. So I hope this was helpful for you. If you enjoyed today's video, please like, share, subscribe to this channel. And we put daily videos out here every day about different attachment styles, neuroscience, subconscious healing, rewiring, nervous system regulation. So check them out. I hope you enjoyed this, and see you soon.